About Zen Mindfulness, Chapter 2, Our Protecting Ego. At the start of this book, I mentioned Zen and that it was about developing acceptance of everything. When we're accepting, we're relaxed, calm and peaceful. When we're not, it's because we've entered our ego mind. Our ego is our resistance to what is. It's our mind letting us know that this is wrong, or this needs to be different, in order to make us feel safe. When we let go of thinking about ourselves as the central hub in relation to what's occurring in life, we become more selfless in our thoughts. This can lead us to greater acceptance, freedom and happiness. Unfortunately, we tend to resist rather than accept things. We don't like it when the car breaks down. We don't like it when it's raining instead of sunny on our days off. We don't like it when we make mistakes. We as humans are constantly fighting this, fighting that, and most of the time these fights exist in our mind, in our thoughts about a situation. Most of our thought resistance comes from our ego, our sense of self. I'm fed up. I wish this wasn't happening to me. I hate it when that person does that. Are all ego statements. Note the use of the I and me and my in these statements. That's a clue straight away that you've gone into your ego mind. These clues can help you to understand the behaviours of others and allow the possibility to respond differently than you would normally. Are they judging? Are they acting from fear-based emotions? Are they resisting what is? If you notice any of this in another person, take a breath and watch carefully for your ego rising up to defend you. Any resistance will come from the voice in our head, our subconscious. This subconscious exists via our past conditioning and memories. Our ego usefully manifests to protect us when we feel frightened. It's part of our fight or flight survival response. The problems begin when we develop habits of ego through our lack of awareness and then use them over and over to get us out of tricky situations. If you came face to face with a lion, for example, your whole body would tense in fear of being eaten. Your ego would tell you to run, or to stay completely still, depending on how best to avoid being eaten. The voice in your head is your protector, and it's an interesting way to look at the voice. We tend to not like this inner voice very much, because it sometimes says scathing things about us, or others. In itself, it is not an enemy, but part of your coping mechanism. In the situation with the lion, it will serve you well. Most things in our daily lives are not as life-threatening as facing a predator that could eat us, yet we rely on our ego over and over to protect us, when we would be better to use our awareness. People who rely on their ego in this way are generally more frightened and easily triggered than those who have learned when to listen to their ego and when not. Our ego is our highly efficient autopilot. It speaks for us when we're in an argument and blurts out all sorts of blame and judgment. Afterward, we tend to feel guilty because of what we said in the heat of the moment. When we speak from our subconscious ego, we're acting out our lives based on the past. Dependent on how your life has been, you'll have a stronger or weaker ego. A stronger ego comes out at the slightest tension. We all know people who are quick to anger or overly anxious. These will be ego-driven developed behaviours because they've had to use the ego more in their life to escape their fears. The ego is reinforced every time it saves you from a threat. But often the fear remains there, and because the ego can't fix the fear, it just plots and plans ways to keep you as safe as possible each time you experience fear. Therefore, someone who has suffered greatly in life has this stronger ego, and this can be metaphorically equated to a suit of armour. This person is so defensive, so frightened, feels so vulnerable, that they have permanently got their suit of armour on so that they can feel safe. Have you ever wondered why some people can stay calm in a situation whilst others panic? The situation itself is no different. Consider a spider in a room. Some people feel so much fear that they must leave. Their friend, meanwhile, can easily remain in the room and might even become mesmerized by the spider's web-weaving talents. These responses are caused by conditioning or by past events. You may not remember the traumatic event or even how your parents responded to spiders when you were young. So the fearfulness might be very bewildering to you because the level of armour your ego has developed seems disproportionate to your accumulated memory of spider experiences. This suit of protective armour is heavy. Noticing how your body is feeling, how your health is doing, are indicators of how much time you spend in your thoughts, in your ego, thinking up ways to escape from your suffering. We use our ego in many ways: habits, addictions, coping mechanisms, everything in our power that the thoughts can concoct to get us away from what's happening. Is your body heavy a lot? Are you always tired, drained of energy? Do you feel you carry a huge weight around with you, a terrible burden? The ego armour tries to hide our suffering from others, although often it's etched in our expression or our posture. The ego compels us to run, escape, or fight our way through life, rather than sit and be with it in harmony. Selflessness is one of the keys to removing our ego armour. Practicing mindfulness creates more selflessness in you. You're simply in the moment and paying attention without judging the situation. Judging a situation is the ego self in all its glory, coming out to reveal itself. When we aren't frightened, it's a simple matter to practice mindfulness. We can look at a sunset and we engage with it. We are fully mindful of the sunset. When we do this, we're not thinking about anything. We're just witnessing the marvel and wonder of a sunset. We don't judge the sunset, other than to perhaps breathe the word beautiful on our lips. This judgment of the sunset enhances the moment as we fully immerse and embrace the beauty of seeing the sunlight disappearing below the horizon. This viewing of the sunset has no ego in it. There's no I in this situation. We're appreciating a moment of awe. If we start judging the situation, though, I'm a bit cold to be sitting here so late in the evening looking at the sunset, or I should have the willpower to do this more often, then we've added this I to the event. We've become selfish. Our attention shifts from awe and reverence to our own discomfort. This thinking about our own discomfort leads to more discomfort, a stronger ego, and more armour to wear. It doesn't mean we don't reach for our jumper to help us if we feel cold. We just don't think the cold is bad. Taking away the need to think about self and just accepting what's happening in each moment makes us more selfless. The more selfless we become, the more at ease we are with life, because the more accepting we become. When we accept, we judge less. When we accept, we let go of the past more readily and can reach the here and now. Awe and reverence become more obvious in your life. It's important to note that self-care isn't selfish. Taking time out because we feel tired or ill is essential for our well-being, as is being kind and compassionate to ourselves in all manner of situations. We aren't able to help anyone as fully as we'd like if we're struggling with our own concerns. Self-compassion isn't our ego, it's our sense that we've noticed something is amiss and we're taking time to heal it. We can even honour our ego by resting for a short while when it causes us to be tired as a way of avoidance, by doing this with full awareness of where the tiredness has come from. We can breathe with the tiredness and regain our energy more quickly, maybe even in a matter of moments. It's worth studying your ego. It's worth noticing when it arises and what it's saying. You'll become more tuned in to what frightens you when you do. Some fears are stronger than others. We might have a fear of certain types of food, and we count that as a lesser fear. We might also have a fear of loneliness, and we count that as a greater fear. Each fear has a certain weight to it. The greater the fear, the heavier you feel. With your practice of mindfulness, you can start looking at your lesser fears first. The less frightened you can become, the more likely you are to unbuckle some of the armour you're in, the more relaxed you'll become, and your body will begin to feel lighter. So perhaps we tune into our fear of types of food, for example. I used to have a phobia about eating tomatoes. It seemed to be based on an early experience with the fruit. I remember feelings of nausea when I first tried one as a young child. Just the thought of trying tomatoes made me nauseous, so of course I avoided them. Over time the fearfulness spread beyond tomatoes, and I found myself to be fearful of pretty much any food which was even slightly unfamiliar or odd to me. This led to becoming anxious about eating food cooked by others, which in turn inhibited my social life and made socializing fearful. The humble tomato was ruling my life, or rather my ego's efforts to protect me from them was. So after some hypnotherapy and much deliberation, I decided to face the fear head on and try a small baby tomato. I noticed my anxiety immediately. I thought about how I might push into the fear. Perhaps I could cut a tiny piece of this tomato and try tasting it. By practicing mindfulness of your body, you can begin to notice when your anxiety arises. What does it feel like with your awareness? Is your heart beating faster? Does your tummy have butterflies? Being with your anxiety longer than whatever you've managed previously begins to lessen this fear. Taking away the judgment of the tomato in my thoughts and coming to how I was feeling helped me. I managed eventually to eat a small piece of tomato after several attempts, and felt the old fear of the past begin to lessen in me. I began unbuckling my ego armour and just being with my reactions. Several years later, and I can now happily eat spicy tomato-laden foods. A life-changing triumph. Being positive is important. When we begin to push toward our fear rather than run away, we're challenging our subconscious patterns. We're delving into a new way of thinking, of behaving in the world. This can cause tension and can cause our ego to adapt and call us names or beat us up or say things like, "What on earth are you doing? You really don't ever need to eat tomatoes, you know." Again, these are all thoughts based on nothing but past fear. By sitting with our fear in the moment, we can see what it is, what it's doing in our bodies, and we can breathe and attempt to calm it. It's important to say here that if you can't face a fear, no matter how lesser or greater, that's also okay. We keep noticing our reactions and send ourselves kindness for even contemplating facing it. You might find once you look at your ego armour there will be lesser fears you'll be able to let go of. There might be ones you'll be able to confront and push through. Each time you do, your armour becomes lighter. You become lighter. There's less for your mind to think about. Looking at the world through curious eyes encourages us to stop feeling so threatened by the world and all the events that befall us. Instead of taking things personally and succumbing to our ego mind, we're fully attentive to what's happening in the present. Curiosity is the link between reality and our own safety. It's generally safe to be in this world, but the ego may have you believing otherwise. Curiosity is what takes the perceived sting out of things that the ego mind can present to you as threats. For example, you may lose your inner peace when you find yourself stuck in traffic. You're in a tailback on the motorway with no sign of when you'll move again. After a while you might notice the ego thoughts, such as, "This is a nightmare," or "Now I'm going to be late." Instead of wallowing in this mindset that focuses on us and self-woe, we can instead view the situation with curiosity. In a curious mindset, you might think, oh, how interesting. Of all the roads I picked and the time I chose to drive, I'm now stuck in traffic. I wonder what this is teaching me. I wonder when we'll move again. So immediately the situation of mind isn't entirely devoted to the self. You may go further. Oh goodness, I wonder if someone has had an accident. Someone else could be struggling here. I hope they'll be okay. Then the curiosity has led you into not thinking about self at all, but into compassion and concern for another human's well-being. This is a step towards selflessness. You may decide while sitting in traffic that this is a perfect opportunity to tune into how you're feeling. You can focus on your breathing and look with awareness at your body. Any aches, signs of tension, any emotions? Maybe you'll find an agitation, an anxiety of being late. So you sink into that, you concentrate on the feeling of anxiety. Breathing in, I feel anxiety. Breathing out, I calm anxiety. It's all okay. At this wonderful moment, I'm using the space to breathe deeply, reconnect to my body with mindfulness, and be with my emotions. Thus, becoming stuck in traffic becomes a space for healing. Life will always throw something at you, be it traffic jams or illness, or the death of someone close. Each moment things will surface. If we can be curious in these moments, especially the tougher ones, we will build our relationship to who we are and how we respond to things. We recognize our feelings and we breathe with them without judgment. We let things flow around us in acceptance. In this way, resilience and inner calmness pervades all we do. There's less room for doubt or insecurity or anxiety when we experience life this way. What is self? This is a good, curious question. When we begin to look deeply, we realize that we are bigger than our ego mind, our thoughts, which give us our sense of self. There's something that is aware of our thoughts. We can feel our breath, and we also don't need to think to make sure we breathe. Often thinking about the breath can lead us to not want to focus on our breath for fear of breathing incorrectly or because of unexplainable discomfort. There's something else, a greater intelligence, a greater wisdom behind everything. This consciousness, this awakened entity, is one of life's greatest mysteries. How is it that all beings and life has this sense of awareness? Even a tiny ladybird on your hand will sense your presence if you put a finger close to it. This presence is everywhere, and we are a part of it. When we contemplate such things, we gain an insight that there's a no-self. We're not separate from everything else, made up of just self. We're also made up of non-self elements such as water, or this presence we see everywhere. When does water become I, or I become water? After a while, the walls of ego begin to fade, like the illusion it is. Our ego is not us. It's just the smaller voice within us that wants to keep us safe. Behind it, behind everything, is a consciousness that wants to understand itself. Pure, untarnished love. It exists and manifests in billions of forms. We are made up of the same elements that make up the universe. Allowing the possibility of this truth, this insight, softens us to other people's pain. No longer a separate being, we can see how we're connected, a part of the great network tapestry we call life. Everything we do affects the whole. If we're kind, then that kindness resonates to the whole network. If we're unhappy, then that suffering resonates to the whole network. What we think we become, and so people around us. Have we suffered enough as a species yet? Mindfulness is the tool that directly engages with each moment, which is all there is. With this awareness, we can begin to sense and trust in our connectedness as beings of love without fear. then the world will also change with us. Where the world appears from our viewpoint not to be changing, we can choose to change our own response to events and circumstances. Thus, we are changing the world by our own behaviours. In our daily lives, we all have to do things, but why not try and do these things with being? Whether it's washing the dishes, cleaning the kitchen floor, potting plants, chopping vegetables, typing an email, cleaning our teeth, or driving our car, each task can be concentrated on, paying full attention to it. Each task can be used as a meditative practice. Take washing the dishes as an example. We're stood there, our mind and body connected, feeling the water in the sink. We're feeling the touch of a dish and the suds of the washing up liquid on our cloth. We're wiping the surface of the dish, concentrating on the cleaning process. Then we're moving on to the next dish, and so on and so on. This is washing the dishes to just wash the dishes. If we're thinking about other things, like what to do after we've washed the dishes, we might rush the dishes. They might not be as clean as if we'd concentrated fully on them. If we're thinking about our problems or issues, then we miss the simple elegance of simple tasks. We're not with our dishes, nor the present moment. We're floating away again into our thoughts. Keep bringing your mind back to the present over and over. This practice can become a daily ritual with all of our routine jobs. This way, we're not judging them. We're not upset when it's our turn to do the dishes, or that nobody else does them. These are just ego thoughts, and will lead to annoyance. Mindfulness takes away the annoyance and leaves us with the experience. In the present, the experience is often one of calm, peaceful acceptance and relaxation. We're in the flow of everything. This is the flow to freedom, a peace within us. For many years, when I worked in an office, the lingering question, who makes the tea, caused interesting ripples. Some people didn't drink much, others drank a lot. Some people were so engrossed in their work or rushing about in meetings' busyness that their turn to make tea never arrived. In some offices we had a rota system of who would make the tea. In others it was a free-for-all, just go when you need a cup and make one for yourself. In another office again were people who just decided they wanted a cup of tea and so would ask everyone else if they did also, the response often being affirmative. At the time, none of these methods seemed satisfactory to me. I certainly drink a lot of tea, so my need for tea, or so I thought, was greater than others. The rota system just produced some very grudging, grumpy cups of tea when the person who felt swamped with work didn't really want to make tea and did so with mutterings. The free-for-all option seemed the best for a while, but that caused feelings of guilt. When seeing others working flat out without refreshment, why should I be allowed to pause for refreshment? Others would often interrupt the rule of going solo by eyeing up the tea or by asking if tea could be made for them too. The other option too was not without its dilemmas. The responses to asking people about tea varied from no, with a stern look for even being talked to people demanding extra things like more milk or more sugar, and if there was no milk, the person making the tea had to go out and buy more. Each possible route then all caused a bit of tension in each office. Some people in some situations never made the tea and were considered selfish oafs. Others felt they were taken advantage of because of their need for tea. Do you see how a simple process of making cups of tea for a group of people can descend into all sorts of problems and thought patterns? Not to mention the emotions, guilt, shame, grief, anger, an unending stream of frustrations of not having tea, of having too much tea or too little, and rifts extending between work colleagues. Life is like this whenever people have a difference of opinion. Dissension and strife, the essence of suffering. I look back and realise that all of these contests of will were run by the ego. Ego, the bit of us that thinks only about ourselves, the thing that tries to separate us from everyone and everything, the thing that says, I am right and you are wrong. So now we come back to the power of mindfulness, the practice of non-judgment, noticing what's occurring in the here and now with our awareness. I decided to adopt a mindful attitude concerning who makes the tea. So without judgment, I let go of the ego thoughts about why is it always me who makes the tea, or why can't they get up and just do it, or I need a system here so everything is fair and just. These were all mental formations based on what I believed to be good or bad, more judgments. Mindfulness isn't like that. It's not using the past experiences to label the present or affect the future. We don't label at all. We just see what's going on in the moment. So, what is going on in the moment? I'm thirsty. I have a craving for tea. Nobody else seems to be worried, but I don't know for sure. So I get up and make tea. However, this time I make tea for everyone. I don't ask. I go and brew a big pot of it and take what I need, and then I leave the rest on a tray in the office kitchen. People soon get to know that I do this. Every time I go and make tea, I'm making the tea. I'm not annoyed that it's always me that goes and makes the tea, because that's just my judgmental ego speaking. I've let go of that. Through constant hours of mindful practice, the practice is still ongoing, that ego comes up quite often, but tea, I've cracked it. Nobody suffers when there's no ego. In the present moment, just making the tea to make the tea, I get my needs met without all the worry about things being unfair or unjust. Other people who didn't voice that they wanted tea are given the choice to have some or not. Either way is fine. Interestingly, after a time, people who saw that I'm making the tea all the time rose up and began making the tea too. There comes a time in every human being where true connectedness comes through. We instinctively want to care for each other and to be cared for in ways that feel joyful and easeful. So without my asking or coercing, others start to make the tea. You might say this is a guilt trip for those people, and perhaps for some it is. However, guilt is as much a lesson in mindfulness as anything else. Why do I feel guilty? Why does the ego make me feel guilty? The answer is because deep down we're threatened. We feel that if we don't make the tea, we'll be labelled as selfish. So we act out this storyline in order to please others and to move the spotlight away from us. If we can let go of this ego thought mentality, we can lose our guilt also. Someone makes the tea, that's it. Nothing more, nothing less.